Francesco Sebastiano Gagliardi, also known as Frank Gagliardi, Frank Gagliano, and Frank the Wop, was born in Manhattan in 1905 and resided in Brooklyn for most of his adult life. The Bay Ridge, Bensonhurst, and Coney Island sections of Kings County were his primary stomping grounds. In later years, he started spending months at a time down in the warmer Sunshine State of Florida, but Frank continued to fly back and forth up to New York City periodically as required. In his early years, he listed his employment as an ice dealer per a 1930 New York City census report. At the time, this was an industry rife with underworld infiltration and rival warfare. During the 1963 United States Senate hearings that featured the testimony of informer Joseph Valachi, Gagliardi was identified as an inducted soldier in the Carlo Gambino family of Brooklyn. He was later further identified as a disciple of Capo di Decina Ettore Zappi, serving as a member of Zappi's crew. Before I continue, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to leave us a comment. Frank the Wop numbered many top Cosa Nostra figures among his closest associates. Over the years, local and federal law enforcement documented his close association and friendships with the following: Carlo Gambino, Paul Big Paul Castellano, Peter Petey Pumps Ferrara, a top Brooklyn-based capo who was a very close and trusted aide to Carlo Gambino himself. Ferrara headed a large crew active in gambling and shylocking, and in particular oversaw a lucrative policy numbers network throughout Kings County. Frankie Dapolito, another key soldier serving in the regime of Capo Terry Zappi. A former professional boxer, Frankie Dapp was appointed a labor official with Teamsters 854 in Valley Stream, and eventually was elevated to a capo position himself with Zappi's semi-retirement to Florida. Natale Big Chris Riccici, another key soldier who served in the regime of Zappi. Riccici later relocated out to Las Vegas, Nevada, where he was appointed a capo, overseeing some of the Gambino family's pornography rackets. Joseph Joe Piney Armone, the kid brother of 14th Street Steve Armone, Joe Piney was a prolific heroin trafficker and strong-arm man who later rose to a hierarchy position with the Gambino family under boss John Gotti. Ettore Terry Zappi was one of the original capo regimes of the family. He served in several administrations for decades. He was a close confidant and highly trusted personal aide to boss Carlo Gambino himself. So close, in fact, that Terry Zappi and Carlo Gambino live right next door to each other in Massapequa, Long Island. Zappi was entrusted to oversee the family's pornography rackets, as well as several Teamsters locals for the family. He was a shrewd and wise mafioso. Anthony Tony Zappi was Terry Zappi's son. As a young man, Tony Zappi was appointed the secretary-treasurer of Teamsters Local 854 by his father and Carlo Gambino. It was a position he maintained for over 3 decades, working in partnership with fellow Gambino soldier Frank Dapolito. Salvatore Sally Westo Imperiali, a veteran soldier of the old Profaci family, Sally Westo was known for having headed a huge truck hijacking operation back in the 1940s and 1950s, in which he worked in tandem with Frank the Wop. Enrico Harry Fontana, another original capo of the Profaci family, Fontana was a highly respected mafioso in charge of the South Brooklyn docks, bookmaking, and a multi-million-dollar numbers operation. The notorious Gallo brothers and Carmine Persico all started out under the auspices of the Fontana regime. Thomas Tommy the Enforcer Altamura, a Miami-based Gambino member who became a notorious figure among local law enforcement. Joseph Joe Scooch Indelicato, an old-time New York-based Gambino soldier who migrated down to Miami during the late 1940s, early 1950s, and became a key point man for that family. Agostino Augie Amato was another highly regarded original soldier of the family who was later bumped up to a capo position after migrating down to Florida. Many Gambino members who later relocated to South Florida served in his regime. Frank Crazy Frankie Amato, he was a member of his father's crew, active in gambling and shylocking. Gagliardi was known to engage in a wide variety of criminality, ranging from bootlegging, gambling, shylocking, strong-arm enforcer, extortion, waterfront piers thefts, truck hijacking, and fencing stolen cargo, and other such mob mayhem. He was known to confine his activities mostly to Kings County, but by the late 1960s, Gagliardi was documented by the FBI as starting to regularly travel down to South Florida for both pleasure and underworld business. His criminal record dates to at least 1923. Over the years, he accumulated a yellow jacket for 5 serious arrests. In 1923, burglary. He received a suspended sentence. In 1935, homicide by gun. In 1945, gambling in New Jersey. In 1946, conspiracy to steal from a foreign shipment. He received 3 years in federal prison. This jail term was later run concurrently with his 1947 theft case. 1947, theft from interstate shipment and conspiracy. He got 6 years in Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary, followed by 5 years probation. Although not convicted of it, as reflected by his record, he had been charged with murder back in the 1930s when he was first cutting his teeth in the mob. Over the years, Frankie the Wop was suspected in several other gangland killings as well. In 1973, underworld informants close to Tampa-based Mafia boss Santo Trafficante were reporting to their FBI handlers that Gagliardi had personally contacted Trafficante regarding the possibility of forming an investment syndicate to finance, develop, and build condominium complexes in the Tampa-St. Petersburg area of the state. At that point in time, Gagliardi was already in the construction business in Dade County and was enmeshed in building condominiums in the Miami Beach area. Trafficante was reported to have turned down the offer because he felt that having additional out-of-town Cosa Nostra figures visiting and operating in the Tampa area would bring too much law enforcement heat to an area already under intense scrutiny. But the very fact that a mere soldier such as Gagliardi was afforded the respect to interact directly with a family boss like Trafficante spoke volumes about Gagliardi's standing in the underworld. We are sure that he reached out to the Tampa boss with the blessing and at the direction of Zappi and boss Carlo Gambino himself. For the most part during his extensive underworld career, Frankie the Wop kept a pretty low profile. He was not one to generally strut his stuff and throw his weight around town, drawing the attention of police, but he was no wallflower either. In his younger years, Gagliardi was knee-deep in the Brooklyn rackets, and his known arrests were for serious offenses. A good example of this was what took place on January 23, 1947. On that day, he and 20 of his underworld associates were arrested in a sweep by the FBI for what officials later described as a brazen truck hijacking ring that stole over $500,000 in merchandise in interstate commerce. Back in the 1940s, $500,000 was the equivalent of over $10 million in goods today. At a press conference, authorities said the gang applied big business methods to steal more than 30 truckloads of scarce goods in one 12-month period alone. The 21 suspects were picked up by agents who fanned out across New York City and the Miami Beach area. 5 men were described as leaders of the theft network. They were held on a whopping $50,000 bail each, a huge sum for that era. The stolen loads included such highly desired and versatile items as electrical appliances and supplies, men's and women's garments, women's handbags, cotton and piece goods, rugs, leather products, musical instruments, and cosmetics. This was during World War II, and many of these items were scarce, being that they were under ration by the federal government and hard to get. Named as the overall kingpin of the operation was a 34-year-old Profaci family soldier named Salvatore Sally Westo Imperiali. The FBI described him as a full-time hijacker and cargo thief. Known as the Westo Gang, the feds said that Imperiali worked in league with 2 other close associates as co-leaders of the hijack mob. They were identified as 36-year-old Romeo the Judge Garofalo and 39-year-old Frank the Wop Gagliardi. John C. Hilly, who was the assistant U.S. attorney in charge of the case, stated in open court that Imperiali and Gagliardi were notorious Brooklyn hoodlums who would stop at nothing. He added that they would not hesitate to commit murder to defeat the ends of justice. In fact, they may be involved in several unsolved murders. For his part, outside the courtroom after his arrest, Gagliardi foolishly said he would take care of those who had testified before the grand jury. Another suspect who was picked up in Miami by agents was identified as Sam Friedman, who the FBI said was an official of 2 New Jersey-based shoe companies, the Roebling Shoe Company and Fiber Solon Shoe Company. Both were located in Paterson, New Jersey. Friedman was suspected of fingering shoe loads for theft. In describing how the gang operated, authorities said Imperiali was usually driven around the New York City area by one of his subordinates daily. When he spotted a truck cargo he liked, he then assigned one of his truck hijacking specialists to case the company and the truckload over a period of days. Specialists were described as hoodlums who were experts at hot wiring the trucks, and other men who could enter a warehouse or truck garage through a skylight without breaking the glass. These men in turn were succeeded by skilled drivers who then took the trucks to 2 drops in Brooklyn where the stolen merchandise was then unloaded. The empty trucks were then driven away and usually abandoned in the Coney Island section. The gang's operations were so complex and the duties of individual gang members so specialized and compartmentalized that some members were able to double-cross their confederates. As an example, authorities said that on one occasion, one robbery crew reported to other crew members that they had been forced to abandon a stolen truck because police were watching them, when actually the men had taken the truck to another cargo drop and later divided the stolen loot amongst themselves. In his later years, Frank started spending more and more time in South Florida. By that time, his capo regime, Terry Zappi, had also permanently relocated down to the Fort Lauderdale area where he had always kept a winter home. Gagliardi joined his mob superior and was widely known to have become his right-hand man in the Sunshine State. They were among a small contingent of elderly veteran Gambino members to do the same. The FBI documented Gagliardi's involvement from time to time in various business meetings and sit-downs held around the Miami and Fort Lauderdale area. The famous Bobby Rubino's Place for Ribs restaurant chain was partially owned by Zappi. He allegedly maintained a hidden interest in it, putting his grandson Frank in charge as manager. Zappi and Gagliardi often utilized Rubino's Fort Lauderdale location. They were later documented by the FBI as holding court and conducting meets with other known mobsters there. After the membership books opened up in 1976, future informant Sammy Gravano revealed to his FBI handlers during his debriefings that he had been among the first 10 new recruits of the Gambino family to be formally inducted into that brigada. He told the FBI that the secret ceremony for this had taken place in the basement of Frank Gagliardi's Bensonhurst, Brooklyn residence. So it seems that although by that point in time he was semi-retired in Florida, Gagliardi was still knee-deep in Cosa Nostra business, so much so that his personal home had been chosen by then-boss Paul Castellano for the first making ceremony. Frankie the Wop was almost 71 years old and was still obviously highly respected and very well thought of. Francesco Sebastiano Gagliardi passed away a few years later in 1982 at the age of 77 years old. Aside from that one single prison bid he did in the late 1940s, early 1950s for truck hijacking, Frank the Wop seems to have led a pretty charmed life as a mafioso. Check out our video bio on Terry Zappi right here in our Mob Fireside Chat library and visit the Button Guys of the New York Mafia website to learn more Mafia history at www.thenewyorkmafia.com. And before you go, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave us a comment. Thank you for watching. Until next time.